Hello, welcome to Oxford History Today. I'm your host, Ron Brock, and today we're going to be talking about the Grand Army of the Republic, commonly referred to as the G.A.R. We've got a very special guest coming in today. But before we introduce him, I think I'll give you a little background on the G.A.R. The G.A.R. was formed in 1866, right after the Civil War. And it was formed in Decatur, Illinois. It was made up of veterans of the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the United States Revenue Cutter Service. Now that's one probably you haven't heard of. In 1790, Congress, right after the Revolutionary War, decided they had to have some money in the Treasury fast. So they started putting a tariff on foreign goods that came in. And the Revenue Cutter Service would go out, meet the ships, collect the tariff off the goods before they ever came in port. Now this revenue service became the Coast Guard as we know it today. But that's getting a little off subject. Getting back to the G.A.R., it grew to its maximum number in about 1890 when they had 490,000 members. Posts were growing all around the country. And it was really the first organized activist group, if you will, that lobbied Congress. They pushed to have, number one, the black veterans have the right to vote. They pushed to have Memorial Day recognized as a national holiday. And they also lobbied Congress to establish a pension for the veterans. This organization started dwindling out as the veterans died off. And it was finally disbanded in 1856 when the last member died in Duluth, Minnesota. And he was 106 years old when he died. That's kind of a background on the G.A.R. It was kind of like the forerunner for the American Legion, where it was just an organization for vets to get together and to pretty much just work for their cause to make it better for them. I think at this time we'll have Mr. Jim Pankhurst come in. Jim is the past commander of Post 108, the American Legion here in Oxford. He's also their curator for their fabulous museum and the historian for the post. So let's welcome Jim in. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the show today.
Well, I'm glad you invited me to come down today. It's been an honor to be here today just to represent the American Legion and its military museum and discuss with you some topics about the Grand Army of the Republic.
Yeah, Jim, the reason I really had you here is I know that your great-grandfather was a member of the Oxford Post of the G.A.R., and you know an awful lot about the history. As I had mentioned before, Jim is the historian for the Post here in Oxford, and he's the curator of their great museum. If you haven't been there before, you really need to see it. It's probably one of the best military museums we have in the state. So if you will, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you and just let you tell us all about this post.
We'll see if we can cover most of what happened around Oxford. My great-grandfather, as Ron said, served with the 108th New York Volunteers during the Civil War. Was in several battles, was wounded a couple times. He was at the Battle of Gettysburg in the middle of Pickett's charge. And as Ron pointed out earlier, that the G.A.R. was formed about 1866 after the Civil War. The Oxford Post at the time had several Civil War veterans that served in this area. In fact, we have about 254 that are listed in a book. The records came from the Department of Michigan out of State Archives. I'd sent for those, and the museum here, the Historical Museum, I should say, from Oxford, and they have a copy of those, and I have a copy as well at the museum at the Legion. It briefly tells the history of each individual, some of the places where they served in the time periods. And several of those gentlemen joined the G.A.R. The Civil War, they had several encampments, and as we mentioned, Gettysburg and various places across the United States, there were different encampments. And times were tough back then. You got to figure after the Civil War, money was tight. A membership only cost them like 10 cents a year to be a member of the G.A.R. And those few pennies were put together, and they tried to do things that helped the community itself, or a veteran within the community that needed help. In the Frank Powell post, they picked a member and they called him the Frank Powell post. Number 187 was the number given to the post by the National at the time, and it was formed on September 23rd, 1883, right here in Oxford. They didn't have a place to meet, so they started meeting at various homes of members, and they would go to one another's homes and maybe meet there for a couple months and go to another home. Eventually they started having meetings, and they met over the Tunstall Hardware here in Oxford on the 3rd floor. And that became a problem. They had a few veterans that couldn't cope with the up and down 3 flights of steps making meetings. So they went back to the process of meeting at the officers' homes at the time. And eventually they started, in conjunction with the American Legion, they met there, and then they acquired a veterans post across the street, and that eventually, that building across the road here from the museum itself, the Vets Hall, became the Vets Hall, and the Vets Association from Oxford after World War II acquired that building, and that stayed until about 1955 or 56. And that's just a brief history on that part of it. But the G.A.R. itself, Frank Powell, he's buried. It has a monument, a large headstone. It's a tall one, about 7 feet tall. It's up here in the old Oxford Cemetery by the cannon. And I mentioned the cannon. The cannon was a 32-pound cannon. The officer at the time in charge of that post was a commander in 1901, was Leonard Hoffman. They acquired a 32-pound cannon, which sits there today on the old cemetery. And we shoot events up there Memorial Day. We try to rotate from cemetery to cemetery to honor our fallen veterans in all the cemeteries. But that cannon was given to the cemetery and is still on display up there today. The last member here in Oxford from the Oxford Post was Samuel Adams. And to the best of my recollection, I believe he was the bugle player that was in the group, played the bugle, and was probably a young boy at the time during the Civil War. He died on December 4th of 1939. In the process of all this, as the G.A.R. grew and the members grew, they created the Frank Powell Women's Relief Corps. Number 260 was the auxiliary of the Grand Army Republic. In other words, it's the ladies. They would basically get together and sew and talk over old times and pass recipes and try to help local veterans, maybe sew a quilt or make some socks, darn some socks for them or something. And they were founded and started their meetings on May 23rd, 1902, I should say. And the meeting rooms at that time were above the old fire hall on Washington Street and Stanton Streets. And that's approximate locations where our theater is on the corner down there now. And the Women's Relief Corps was called the WRC. It was primarily known for their patriotic work in the community. In 1925, the village of Oxford gave the Women's Relief Corps, they gave them a monument. It was put in the corner down here, Mechanic Street, and that's since been moved to the park.
Okay. Yeah.
We're getting off the subject on the G.A.R. a little bit, but...
No, that's right, because the Women's Relief Corps was actually the wives of the veterans, so we were just kind of an auxiliary to them. We'll wrap up this segment, and when we come back, we'll talk some more about this Oxford Post.
All right. Thanks, Ron.
Canine Stray Rescue is Oxford's own local dog rescue. Each year they take in hundreds of dogs and bring them into suitable homes. A certified nonprofit organization, Canine Dog Rescue strives to give pound dogs a new leash on life. To donate, adopt, or even volunteer, call them at 248-628-0435 or go to their website, dogsaver.org, and click on the Canine Stray Rescue League link.
Jim, I kind of thought that we would talk a little bit about the activities of the G.A.R. here back in the day. We talked a little bit about their meeting places and some of the Oxford vets, but as I understand, they had other posts around here, smaller posts like in Ortonville and Hadley and stuff. And when they kind of got small, they started coming to Oxford. Could you kind of expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, there was several of the smaller communities within this area. I believe there was a small segment of guys, there were a few lived in the Ginzerville area.
Okay.
That came over this direction to Oxford, and probably some in the Lake Orion area, because Oxford had a post at the time. Some from the Leonard area and Lakeville area. Leonard actually had a small post. And as time went on, the members started passing away. Membership was small. They kind of consolidated, and Oxford became a central meeting place.
Okay.
There were some gentlemen, Civil War vets from Thomas and Metamora area that ventured this way, and they combined to kind of the camaraderie to keep the organization going towards the end, and that's what they did. I know back through my family it was mentioned that they used to get together by horse and buggy when they first started, and they didn't have a building, as we'd mentioned. They would travel down Sashabaw Road. I think the old stagecoach route was down Baldwin and Sashabaw in that area. Had some stops over there. Anyway, they would go down to the old church that still stands today on Maybe Road there.
Okay.
And Mary Sue near Sashabaw Maybe. They used to meet there at the church, and the ladies' auxiliary would take over and take lunch and the blankets and bring the kids. And while they were preparing outside, when the church service was over, they would prepare lunch and get together out there. Well, the guys would sit down and maybe smoke their pipe or a cigar or whatever, and sit down and have a general meeting of their members. And several of them from that area would consolidate to meet. But that's kind of what they did. They were community organization. I mean, we had Maccabees in the old days, and
Sure.
and the Masons and the Oddfellows. So kind of we all did the same things, and many of those were organizations as well, had veterans in them.
I also see that they also had like annual encampments where they would get together with other posts and just have like a big reunion, if you will, every year. Because I know I've seen quite a few of the reunion ribbons and a lot of the encampment ribbons, and they're really pretty fancy. We have some to display today. So could you tell us a little bit more about these reunions or encampments?
Yes, the Weisner House in Pontiac, they held some of their encampments in that area at the Weisner grounds that were down there. Oxford had an encampment, I believe it was around 1903. Blanchard is on the ribbon, was one of our local veterans from the Civil War. There was another encampment, I think that one we mentioned at Weisner House was there in Pontiac, but there were other ones within this area, and I have approximately 15 of those encampment medals and ribbons that I brought with me today.
Oh, great, great, yeah, I look forward to seeing them. I brought a few in also. And we also have some clothing that the G.A.R. men had in their uniforms. And I think maybe at this time we'll go on over and start looking at them and just admiring what each other has. So let's walk over and take a look at these things. Here we go, Jim. I know you have a lot of things here that you brought.
Why don't you start with yours down in this end, Ron?
I can. I'll start down here. These are all put together by my son, who is quite a Civil War buff. And he has quite a few items here. One, this is a G.A.R. kepi, which is a hat that they would have worn. That was part of their uniform. They also had a slouch hat, which is kind of like a cowboy hat, really.
I have one of those on display at the museum.
Yep, you sure do. And that's what these guys would wear. This is the G.A.R. badge that you will find on all their uniforms. We also have a G.A.R. cane. And as these fellows got older, they actually started using these canes. It's got the shield up here with the eagle and G.A.R. written out on the handle of the cane. This is really in fantastic shape. This is a certificate that was given to the Civil War veterans by the G.A.R. And this individual happened to be from Ohio. And this is how colorful and large these certificates were. The membership certificates you get from the American Legion today aren't anything like this.
No.
This is really quite a document. We have another one downstairs here at the museum but it is nowhere near as nice as this one. We were very fortunate to find it. We have a few of the ribbons that we had talked about, of the annual reunions, and we have some here. These are from the Lapeer Post. Here's one of Oxford. Here's one of Oxford. There's Pontiac here.
That was one we mentioned at Weisner House.
At the Weisner House, right.
They actually camped in tents out there.
That's what they did in their encampments, and that's something I wanted to point out. Here's another one from Lapeer County. This one's from Lapeer County. This is a membership badge, and this one's a little bit different in that this one belonged to a chaplain. That's the reason for the blue bar up on top. It's a little bit different than the other membership badges that you saw. This is a grouping from Mr. Blanchard that we had mentioned before. Here's a photo of him from way back when. One of the encampment ribbons with his photo on the button, and a little bit of a bio of Mr. Blanchard there. We have a book here, which is the history of the Grand Army of the Republic, and it's quite a book, and it's it just gives you a brief, well, I won't say brief, look at the size of the book, quite a detailed history of the G.A.R. So these are the items that I brought in. Jim, if you would, you'll show us what you have.
Sure. Ron had mentioned earlier about the swords. This is an actual Civil War sword used by NCOs. You can tell by the crest that's on it and the 13 stars. It's kind of unique in the fact that after the Civil War, the G.A.R. members would carry these to meetings and wear them, kind of a parade type thing that they would use. So that's kind of an odd piece too, and that's an original. We had mentioned earlier about the Civil War records, and these are located here in the Northeast Oakland Historical Society's museum right here in Oxford where we're standing. They have the records compiled. There's 254 that came in. They're copies from the Lansing archives, and you can view these at any time.
We'll kind of break it off here. We got a few more seconds to go through. Maybe you could explain this item, Jim.
Sure.
This is really intriguing.
This is kind of neat. When they had the funeral for a G.A.R. member, it has the medal itself on here that's embedded into it, but there was a death card, and it had a little information about the individual, maybe his picture, and laid on the casket. And it's kind of unusual. You don't see these around very often.
I think when we come back, Jim, we'll go through some more of your items, and then we'll talk about what we have here permanently on display in the museum. Okay, Jim, we were talking about this death card display rack you had, and I see you brought a death medal in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
This was pinned on a uniform. It's not so much as something, it's an honor that was given when the person passed away by the G.A.R. They would give this to him, and it would be pinned on the front of his frock coat. Someone still wore their Civil War uniforms, you got to remember. Just as veterans today wear their modern type uniforms, they did the same thing. And this was pinned on and worn. This is one that happened to, it was saved and didn't get buried with the individual. We have another medal up here as well. This actually belonged to my great-grandfather. The medal, if you happen to have one of these, brief history, These are made out of bronze, and these are captured Confederate cannons. And after the Civil War, the G.A.R. got permission, and they melted several of those bronze cannons down. And this medal was designed, and it looks a lot like our Medal of Honor that's out there today. It has the cross cannons with an eagle on it. It has the Lady Liberty standing on the front with 2 children on the front. And on each corner has a branch of the service. It's got the bugle and the cavalry with the cross sabers. On the edge of this medal, there's a serial number. And I've been told that if you write in, some of those records are still available, and they can tell you if that was actually a medal that was given to your relative or your great-great-grandfather, as it be. And on the back, there are several organizations on the back that are represented, and these are all the units that fought during the Civil War, basically, that are stamped on the back of this medal. It's kind of unique. We have several other things here. Let me show you this one. This is from my family, and give me a hand with this, Ron.
Yeah, I'll give you a hand with it.
We mentioned this. This is the 108th New York Volunteers roster that's in the middle. Several of those gentlemen from this area that went off to serve back in the Civil War. And this one's familiar. We just saw one that Ron had in his and the one next to it. And we're lucky in the sense that we have a few of these in our possession here in the Oxford area, that some of us have those, are able to retain them. This is kind of an important one up here. This is also a burial one from the post writer, Frank Powell Post. It was black with gold trim, black because they lost a member, and that's why it's in that condition. But there are several of them from New York and around this area that are listed in here. This one here is a picture. This is a picture of some of the last officers of the Civil War G.A.R. post right here in Oxford. My great-grandfather is one of the individuals on this corner, and I believe this gentleman up here, he had lost his left arm during one of the Civil War battles, Thomas W. Morrison, and he's buried up here in the cemetery by the cannon. Some of these individuals, we don't know who they are, but if you happen to recognize someone in this picture at home or would like to visit the museum here, Ron or myself would be glad to sit with you. We'd like to try to find out who some of these individuals were. The museum here, the Historical Museum, has several other pictures of individuals that are up here, and we'd like to find out who some of these Oxford residents were. Some of these were officers, may not necessarily be from Oxford. They could have been from Hadley, or could have been from Leonard or Lakeville, because they represented the last of the guys that were in the Civil War from this area. This picture is not as large. It shows a picture in the old days when Ed Bizzardi was alive and was associated with the museum here. I took Ed and picked him up one day, and Ed and I went up to the old cemetery, Oxford Township, where the cannon is. And we got to looking around and lined this picture up, and these pine trees are in the background of these pictures are still there today. They're much larger. And see, the wooden flagpole that was in the picture has been replaced now with a modern-day metal pole. And the cannon, of course, sits right in this general area. And there is a burial plot up there right now that has about, I think there are 12 individuals buried on those veterans plots. But this represents the old Civil War vets guys from the area. And you can see him hanging on to the bugle. I believe that was A.P. Losey that was in there playing that bugle. My great-grandfather is standing in the middle and back of the drum. We'd like to know who some of these other individuals were. There are several items out there, and this happens to be one of them. And this is a G.A.R. spoon, Washington, D.C., when they had an encampment. And I imagine in the old days, this was made out of sterling silver. It probably didn't cost much more than maybe 10 cents at the time, but it's a very important piece. It was dated 1892. And these are things that, if they had the money, could pick up and bring back, and for keepsakes is what they were. And I know Ron and his son Ron both have several of these things in their displays at home. And it's kind of neat that we do this stuff, and Ronnie and I were here today to put things on display so you could see them at home. This is another one. This is another item that they could have purchased. It has a G.A.R. medal inside, and I don't know if you can see it at home real good. I'll hold this up maybe in front of my white shirt. You can see it better. There's a lot of color to it. It's a paperweight you put on your desk at home, and it's really kind of neat. It's got a lot of color inside. It shows the G.A.R. medal inside of it. But these are just some of the items that could have been purchased while they were at those encampments. And as Ron and I mentioned before, they actually camped in tents, cooked out there. That's the way they lived in the field when they were in the military.
Sort of like the modern day reactors.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's one here.
This was one of the G.A.R. scrapbooks that they had, and it had various items in it. It showed the unit crest of different parts of the military, artillery, infantry. The history, there's a brief history on the Army Corps in there, the Corps of badges, the type of badges that were used, the regiments that, by the number of what was in there and that was used. You can see the signal corps represented in the different crests that were used at the time. These were also purchased probably for a song at the time.
Oh yeah, a couple pennies.
To them
maybe.
it was a lot of money in the old days, and it was hard. Things were tough after the Civil War. You got to remember that was father against father, son against Southern. I mean, that's the largest war this country has ever fought, and we fought right here in our own country. So those are kind of one of the things you want to remember. But it's kind of neat that we have these here, and we got one more item down here to show them. This one. This is a G.A.R. Grand Army Republic. It's just a banner to welcome veterans home and to the post. And it's kind of unique. It's got the big thing in the middle of the medal. And you can see that we had the bronze medal, which is smaller, we had earlier. This is basically the same thing that you can see much clearer. And I have this on display down at the Legion.
Right. Okay, great. We have a few items here that are on display permanently at the museum. One, we have the original charter for the Oxford post of the G.A.R. It's here in a frame. It's not been preserved very well, so it's pretty much fading out, but you can still make out a lot of what's here. We also have over here the original charter from the Women's Relief Corps that we had mentioned before, and we also have a Women's Relief Corps medal, which was given to each member. And again, the members of the Women's Relief Corps were the wives of the veterans that belonged to the G.A.R. And we have some items down here in the showcase. We have some buttons that were on the G.A.R. uniforms. We have some gloves. We have an old tintype of some of our G.A.R. members from this post. And we have some photographs of different members of the G.A.R. We also have something kind of unique here. This is a little bit of information on the prison at Libby, and that was a Confederate prison where Union soldiers were kept, and it wasn't very nice. Jim, I want to thank you so much for coming today.
I want to thank you, Ron.
And sharing your information with us, and I'm sure the people out there really enjoyed hearing you too.
I want to thank
Thanks
you. I want to
again.
thank you and wish you a happy holidays.
Same to you, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, you got me right in the middle of prep for one of our wine dinners. We've got 14 guests coming up tonight. We're serving as the main course, game hens. And I'm getting the stuffing. There's stuffing in the birds and of course more on the side. So you really should come up sometime and enjoy one of our wine dinners. Up here right now, we're all ready for Christmas. We have the trees up. The tree in the back room is decorated with my parents' original ornaments from 1953 and my daughter's rocking horse collection. And my mangers are here, and we've got so much going on, so would really love it if you'd come back. Come on up and join me here at the lodge for a wine dinner or some other event. Right, and watch my show here on OCTV and on YouTube. This is Connie from Connie's Kitchen saying Merry Christmas, be kind to one another, and I'll see you soon.